Tony Blair urges Britons to rise up against the decision to leave the EU. He says people voted without knowing the real terms. The former Prime Minister says it's his mission to encourage people to speak out against what he calls the government's drive to exit the EU at any cost.
The people voted without knowledge of the terms of Brexit. As these terms become clear, it is their right to change their mind.
We heard all these arguments last year. Not a thing has changed. And I think it really is insulting the intelligence of the electorate to say that they got it wrong.
We'll have the latest from Westminster. Also this lunchtime, President Trump's choice for his new national security advisor turns down the job. Here, retail sales fall unexpectedly. Some analysts say it's the beginning of a long-anticipated slowdown in the economy. Brain power required. Scientists appeal for more people to donate their brain so they can do more research into illnesses such as depression. And Arsene Wenger says he will still be a football manager next season, even if that isn't at Arsenal.
In the south, the search continues for a man believed dead and buried under the rubble following an explosion in an apartment block. And we meet a deaf husband and wife as they hear each other's voices for the first time.
All right, let's just turn it off.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. Tony Blair has said it is his mission to persuade Britons to rise up and change their mind about leaving the European Union. Speaking in the City of London, the former Prime Minister claimed that people had voted in last year's referendum without knowing the true terms of Brexit. His comments have been described as arrogant and undemocratic by the Conservative MP Ian Duncan-Smith. Meanwhile, Theresa May has written in a French newspaper that Britain won't try to cherry-pick which parts of EU membership it wants to keep during the withdrawal negotiations. The Prime Minister is meeting her French counterpart, Bernard Cazeneuve, in Downing Street this afternoon.
A former Prime Minister putting himself back in the debate. Yes, the people voted for Brexit, said Tony Blair. But
it is their right to change their mind. Our mission is to persuade them to do so.
This was a rallying cry. Britain faced an economic cliff edge, he said, and those who opposed Brexit should speak up.
They will say leaving is inevitable. It isn't. They will say we don't represent the people. We do. Many millions of them, and with determination, many millions more. This is not the time for retreat, indifference, or despair, but the time to rise up in defence of what we believe.
The former Labour Prime Minister had frank words for his party seeing the Brexit bill through Parliament.
The debilitation of the Labour Party is the facilitator of Brexit. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Tony Blair knows his opponents are armed with an awesome political argument, that they are carrying out what people voted for. Well, minds can be changed, he said. But his message faces another obstacle that will be exploited by his critics, the person who's delivering it.
This is the guy who dragooned the United Kingdom into the Iraq War on a completely false prospectus. So I respectfully say to Tony Blair, those who call on the British people to rise up against Brexit, I urge the British people to rise up and turn off the TV next time Blair comes on with his condescending campaign.
But it wasn't only Brexit campaigners who questioned Mr Blair's speech. One former boss of the official Remain campaign told me it might lead to more division.
Tony Blair isn't speaking for the whole of those on the Remain side of the argument. I think there are lots of different views. There are lots of people who are disappointed by the outcome, but the idea that you tell people we're not listening, you need re-educating, is frankly wrong and patronising.
Theresa May wrote in a French newspaper today that Britain wouldn't try to cherry-pick the best parts of EU membership when outside. With only weeks until the likely start of the Brexit process, the debate is intensifying. Today's speech from Tony Blair, tough in tone and uncompromising in message, has raised the temperature once again. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Westminster.
And let's talk to our political correspondent, Carol Walker. Carol, more than 6 months have passed. The results of the vote can't be changed. What is Tony Blair's thinking here, do you believe?
Well, I think what Tony Blair has seen is the way the debate has gone, the way the government's policy has evolved. He says the government is obsessed with Brexit and claims that the whole process is being driven by ideologues, those who are strongly committed to the whole process of taking Britain out of the EU and doing so by leaving the single market, probably leaving the customs union too. And he believes that the Labour Party is failing to provide any adequate opposition to the way the process is unfolding. So how is he going to bring about this change of mood from the British people? Well, he wouldn't commit to a second referendum, though it seems that that is the only way this could possibly be reversed. But what he's doing is setting up this institute to try to, as he puts it, reposition the whole debate. Now, it's perhaps no surprise that there has been an absolutely scathing reaction from pro-Brexit campaigners, accusing him of being arrogant, of being undemocratic, of treating the British people as mugs, dismissing them and saying they didn't understand what they were voting for. But what's interesting is that, as you heard in that report there, even some of those who wanted to remain inside the EU now say, look, we've had that vote in the referendum, we now need to accept it and move on. So I think Tony Blair is hoping that his intervention will mobilise a very different tide of public opinion. But of course, to many people, he is quite a toxic figure, and many doubt that he will make a huge difference to the course of our process out of the European Union.
All right, Carol, thank you. Carol Walker. The former naval admiral chosen by President Trump to be his national security advisor has turned down the job in another setback for the White House. Retired Vice Admiral Robert Harwood was widely tipped for the post after Donald Trump fired Michael Flynn on Monday. But he decided to reject one of the most important positions in the cabinet just hours after Mr. Trump denied that his administration was in chaos. At a news conference, the president said his team is operating like a fine-tuned machine. Wira Davis has this report.
Donald Trump is a president like no other. Critics say he governs and goes about his business like he's tearing up the rule book, lurching from crisis to crisis. But barely a month into his presidency, the billionaire businessman turned reality TV star turned leader of the free world insists that things couldn't be going any better.
I turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Chaos. Yet it is the exact opposite. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine.
But even as the president spoke, Vice Admiral Robert Howard, his preferred pick as the new national security advisor, was turning down the chance to join Team Trump. The former Navy SEAL reportedly dissuaded by the power struggles and demands of the president's inner circle. Evidence, say Mr. Trump's opponents, that he's struggling to keep the ship steady in the face of a raging storm.
Every new administration has its growing pains, but consider his. He had to dismiss his acting attorney general. He faced an executive order which was rejected by 3 different federal courts, and then he had to take the resignation of his national security advisor. That's never happened to any president in history. Fine-tuned machine, off to a pretty rough start.
It's not hard to decipher who the president blames for creating an atmosphere of chaos that he says doesn't actually exist.
The press has become so dishonest that if we don't talk about it, we are doing a tremendous disservice to the American people. Tremendous disservice. We have to talk about it.
His principal targets are the established giants of the US media, the New York Times, CNN. But even some commentators on the normally supportive Fox News channel have their issues with President Trump.
This president keeps telling untrue things, and he does it every single time. He's in front of the microphone. It's demonstrable. I can re-rack the tape for you. There were a lot of them today. Some of them aren't really big, but they're coming from the President of the United States.
But Mr. Trump is on a mission to rebuild America. His supporters say no amount of misplaced criticism from the established media will derail them.
We are going to continue to do what we did so very, very successfully, and the thing that put the former real estate billionaire into the White House, and which is to break your sense of monopoly on the news. The mainstream media no longer gets to monopolize news, and we are going to go straight to the audiences, whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through YouTube, it doesn't matter.
Indeed, as he signed away environmental regulations, keeping a campaign promise to support coal mining jobs and prepared to appoint a new hardline head of environmental protection, Mr. Trump says he's getting on with the business of government. Not to the liking of liberal and media elites, perhaps, but very much his way. Willow Davis, BBC News.
And let's get more on that from Gary O'Donoghue, who is in Washington. He says it's business as usual. We certainly are hearing a little bit more about some other appointments, Gary.
Yes, we are. We're hearing that, of course, this replacement for National Security Advisor that he was hoping to announce, Bob Harwood, doesn't want the job. So we still don't have a National Security Advisor after losing Michael Flynn at the beginning of the week. We're expecting later today for Scott Pruitt to be confirmed as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, that's a sort of cabinet-level job and an incredibly controversial job in this country. There's a lot of lobbying against the Environmental Protection Agency and a lot of concern among Democrats that he is not a friend of the environment and has taken out a lot of cases as Attorney General in Oklahoma against the Environmental Protection Agency, but that should go through. But still, we don't have a full cabinet. This is week 4, just ending today, of the presidency, and he doesn't have a full cabinet, and he doesn't have a lot of those posts in place at the second tier in the various departments, deputy secretaries and assistant secretaries. So it's an administration really that's running on half a tank at the moment, despite the president saying it's finely tuned.
Gary, thank you. Gary O'Donoghue there in Washington. The pound has fallen further against other currencies, including the dollar and the euro, after official figures showed the UK's retail sales took an unexpected tumble last month. Some analysts think the figures suggest that the slowdown that was predicted in the wake of a vote to leave the EU has now begun. Simon Gompertz has been taking a look at what's put the squeeze on our spending power.
Despite the early sales, the January sales, and now the late sales, have people become tired of shopping and wary about the future?
I'm a self-employed carpenter, and I think people are closing their wallets up generally. Like, I'm not getting the work I was getting before Brexit, right? Because people don't know what's happening.
I think perhaps people are expecting the worst, so they're holding back until they know a bit more about the future.
So maybe they've got the money, they're just not spending it.
Yes, that could be, just being cautious.
No, personally, I've shopped more after Christmas, I think. I probably shouldn't do, but no, I think most of my mates are still shopping.
The drop in retail sales in January sounds small at 0.3%, but a rise was expected, and it comes after a 2.1% decline the month before. Officials saying higher prices for food and fuel are partly to blame.
If people really have closed their wallets, zipped up their purses, that could be crucial for the coming year, because it's the British shopper keeping spending who's kept the economy growing despite the uncertainties following the vote for Brexit.
The drop in the value of the pound after the referendum means imports like technology and cars, as well as food, are more expensive. That's off-putting, and if people do buy, it means they have less to spend elsewhere.
Only a week or so ago, the Bank of England told us they expect the economy to grow by 2% this year, the same as last year. Unfortunately, this is an abrupt wake-up call that actually the economy could be slowing down and we may not achieve that sort of growth.
The pound faltered again today because of these worries about the outlook for the UK. The retail sales figures are highly volatile, though, like the pound itself, so it is possible that the next move could be up. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
The American food giant Kraft Heinz has confirmed that it's made an offer to take over the huge Anglo-Dutch company Unilever, which makes brands including Marmite and PG Tips. Although Unilever has rejected the initial approach, Kraft Heinz said it looks forward to working to reach an agreement. Let's find out more from our business correspondent, Jonty Bloom. How significant is all of this, Jonty?
Well, let's put this in context. Unilever is the third largest company in the UK overall. It has 400 brands around the world. world, 13 of which, brands like OVO and Magnum and Lipton, sell more than £1 billion worth every year, and it employs about 170,000 people. It is just one of the most important companies in the world, and Heinz Kraft are trying to buy it for something like £112 billion.
So what happens next? What's the next stage?
Well, Unilever have rejected this original offer, but that's just the start of the dance, so to speak. Heinz could come back with a bigger offer. We probably expect them to do that. And then it would depend on whether Unilever decides that's a good enough deal to recommend to its shareholders and to accept the takeover, or whether to fight it. And then there's the issue of regulation. You're talking about two of the largest food and household product companies in the world potentially merging. They spend an awful lot on TV. They control an awful lot of products. Would governments around the world be happy having all that spending power on all those products in one company?
Jonty, thank you. Jonty Bloom. Malaysia says it won't release the body of the half-brother of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un until it receives DNA samples from his family to confirm his identity. Kim Jong-nam died at Kuala Lumpur Airport on Monday. It's believed he was poisoned. 2 women and a man have been arrested. An autopsy has been carried out, but the findings have not yet been released. Pakistan's security forces have carried out raids across the country, killing and arresting dozens of suspected militants following yesterday's suicide attack at a famous Sufi shrine in the south of the country. The attack was claimed by so-called Islamic State. Our Pakistan correspondent, Secunda Kamani, reports.
The shrine was packed with men, women and children for the special devotional services that take place here on Thursday nights. Then this happened. Jihadists believe Muslims who attend shrines like this are heretics and have frequently targeted them. Today, the families of the dead began to bury their loved ones. This woman's 13-year-old son was amongst those killed. His uncle expressed the family's sorrow.
He only wanted to pay his respects at the shrine. Evil people planted a bomb there. He was martyred in the explosion. He was very young. I raised him like my own child, as I don't have any children. He was my child and they took him from me. God will punish them.
There have also been angry scenes close to the shrine where locals have clashed with police, who they blame for not having done enough to stop the suicide bomber.
Everyone is weeping. Proper security was not there. We have been telling the police and other officials that there was no security and that anything could happen any time. But nobody listened.
Security has been stepped up at religious sites considered possible targets like this Sufi shrine. Paramilitary forces say they've killed dozens of suspected militants in raids carried out across the country today. But Pakistan has now suffered 5 attacks in 5 days, carried out by a range of different groups. One faction of the Pakistani Taliban has vowed to unleash a new bombing campaign. It's not known whether this latest attack by IS is linked to that, but many here now fear that after a recent significant reduction in violence, the security situation is once again deteriorating. Secunda Kamani, BBC News, Islamabad.
It's 18 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair urges Britons to rise up against the decision to leave the EU. He says people voted without knowing the real terms. And still to come, how a man's search for food in rubbish bins has led to wedding bells 40 years later.
In South today, could controversial charges for taking some types of waste to the tip be dumped by councillors? Concern about fly tipping means there's pressure for a rethink. And an initiative to inspire and support young children who've lost limbs because of meningitis.
Scientists are appealing for more people to donate their brain for scientific research. In particular, they need to carry out research on the brains of people who've suffered illnesses such as depression and post-traumatic stress disorder in order to develop new treatments. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports from one of the largest brain banks in the world, in Boston, in the United States.
The human brain. Inside, it's as beautiful as it is complex. It's this wiring that changes and grows as we do. It's a physical embodiment of our behaviour and who we are. That's why they're stored in brain banks like this one. They're donated so that scientists can study them to discover what happens when our brains go wrong. 3,000 brains are stored here at one of the world's largest brain banks. Most of them are from people with some form of mental or neurological disorder, and they're now being used by researchers to try and find new treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's and a whole host of psychiatric disorders. But there's a problem. Researchers here at McLean Hospital just outside Boston and in brain banks across the world don't have enough specimens to do their research. In particular, they're lacking donations from people who had depression and post-traumatic stress disorder because they're thought of as being psychological and not due to changes in the brain.
If people think that there are no changes in the brain of somebody that suffers from major depression or post-traumatic stress disorders, then there is no reason to donate their brain for research because there is nothing there to find. This conception is radically wrong from a biological point of view.
I'm so glad that we donated my mother's brain.
Caroline has decided to donate her brain for medical research, just as her mother once did. Her sister has schizophrenia. She hopes her donation will help researchers find a cure, and she's urging others to do the same.
My parents were fine, but why did my sister get schizophrenia? We're not sure where it came from. And how are we going to find out if we don't do the research on the brain, which is where it's starting? That's where the problem is.
Scientists say that new treatments for many mental and neurological diseases are within their grasp, but it's a lack of brain tissue that's holding back their research. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Boston.
Princess Cristina of Spain has been cleared of tax fraud. She faced an 8-year prison sentence if found guilty. The 51-year-old sister of the king was the first royal in Spain to face criminal charges since the restoration of the monarchy in 1975. Her husband was convicted of fraud and tax evasion and was given a 6-year prison sentence. Events are being held to mark the centenary of the sinking of a troop ship in the Channel during the First World War, with the loss of more than 600 lives. Most of those who died were black labourers from South Africa who'd been conscripted to help British forces during the conflict. The disaster is little known, as Tim Muffet reports.
Private Daniel Mafika, Private Daniel Konyama.
The names of more than 600 killed in one of the UK's worst maritime tragedies.
Private Jacob Payo.
Yet most have never heard of the sinking of the SS Mendy.
History has really forgotten them. They've become the unremembered men of the First World War.
The SS Mendy was sailing from Cape Town to northern France when in thick fog near the Isle of Wight she accidentally collided with a larger ship. More than 800 members of the South African Native Labour Corps were on board. More than 600 were lost.
They were labourers needed to support the British Army on the Western Front. They built railway lines, they built roads. The British Army depended on them.
The discrimination experienced by many members of the South African Labour Corps in life continued in death. The sinking of the SS Mendy was barely mentioned in official histories of World War I. Most bodies were never recovered. The few that were are now buried in Portsmouth. Tennyson, Natalia and Siboniso are direct descendants of men who died on the Mendy, and they've travelled from South Africa for the centenary commemorations.
They did get on board that ship because they were patriotic. They were serving both the Union of South Africa and the King.
It's an emotional event coming here. It is only now, after the new dawn of South Africa, that assessment is talked about.
We didn't have any recognition. At last, we have come. I have come representing the family.
The South African Navy Band have also travelled here for the commemorations, victims of a largely forgotten tragedy at sea, officially recognised at last. Tim Muffet, BBC News, Portsmouth.
English football's current longest-serving manager, Arsene Wenger, says he will definitely still be a manager next season, whether at Arsenal or elsewhere. It is the first time the 67-year-old has hinted that he might be prepared to leave the Gunners after 21 years in charge, and comes after his team were thrashed 5-1 by Bayern Munich. Our reporter David Ornstein was at Arsene Wenger's news conference this morning.
Arsenal have lost 5-1 here in Munich against Bayern, and this tie over before the second leg.
Was this the lowest moment for one of English football's longest-serving managers? And after 21 years in charge, is Arsene Wenger preparing to bid farewell to Arsenal?
No matter what happens, I will manage next season. Is it here or somewhere else? That's absolutely for sure. You do not stay somewhere for 20 years and you walk out of a defeat like that and you whistle, I have the strength and the experience to respond to that.
In 1996, Wenger arrived to headlines of Arsene Who, but soon he silenced the critics by collecting trophies. A pioneer on and off the pitch, he turned the likes of Thierry Henry into superstars, and his team became invincibles, going an entire league season unbeaten. Among his achievements, 3 Premier League titles and 6 FA Cups. Well, Arsene Wenger hasn't only managed this club, he's transformed it. The team, their new stadium, and even this state-of-the-art training ground are all based on his vision. But not everything has gone to plan. He's failed to conquer Europe, defeating the 2006 Champions League final to Barcelona a particular blow, while an increase in supporter unrest this season has seen the pressure mount.
I think what is important is that the club makes the right decisions for the future. I did not work here for 20 years not to care about this club, because I had many opportunities to go somewhere else during that period, and it is very important that the club is always in safe hands.
Arsenal are still in 3 competitions. If Wenger's comments are anything to go by, this could well be his last crack at each. He'll hope a final piece of glory is not out of reach. David Ornstein, BBC News.
A couple who've been nicknamed by some of their friends the Lady and the Tramp are making their final preparations for their wedding this weekend. Joan Neiniger met Ken Selway more than 40 years ago when he was sleeping rough on the streets of Gloucester. Our correspondent John Kay takes up their story.
A little lawn there, wasn't there? And there was a seat there for people to sit on.
The bride and groom, Joan and Ken, back on the street where they first met. Their story reads like a novel. Appropriate then that it began here in a bookshop.
That was my lounge and that was my bedroom up there.
Joan ran the little shop in the centre of Gloucester with her husband. And one day in 1975 she saw Ken through the window. He was homeless and hungry.
The bin was over there. That's where the bin when I used to go and look for food. You see, because I was hungry.
So Joan gave Ken a cup of tea that day and sketched this picture of him. He was a shy man who'd suffered a head injury working in the coal mines. He developed schizophrenia and ended up sleeping rough.
He always looked as if he didn't belong in the streets. He looked gentlemanly.
Joan invited Ken to move into her family home, and she helped him find medical treatment. Over the years, he became part of the household, drifting in and out of their lives. Although Joan's relationship with Ken was purely platonic, her husband would sometimes be jealous. But as the decades passed, the 3 of them became good friends. Then in 1983, Joan's husband Norman died.
How lonely life can be, the shadows follow me.
But I don't let
Which brings us to today. Ken and Joan about to marry, 42 years after that first cup of tea.
How much of a difference has Joan made to your life?
Big difference. I've got security now.
Stable.
A roof over my head. When it was on the street, it was terrible.
Yeah, no comparison, yeah.
At times, Ken's mental health problems have been severe. But Joan has helped him, and together they've tried to raise awareness of schizophrenia.
The voices in my head would have drove me to kill myself.
Yeah.
Do you think she saved your life?
Yes, yes. She did.
We have ups and downs, and you make me want to swear sometimes. But you know what I think of you. I don't have to put it into words. It's just that part of me.
It was Joan who proposed to Ken, with the full support of her children and grandchildren.
I said, well, will you marry me? And he said, yes, yes, yeah. It was a big laugh of the day for him. We just belong together. That's all.
What about the future? What does the future hold in store for you now?
Well, there won't be babies, and there won't be a white wedding dress.
John Kay, BBC News, Gloucestershire.
But, well, will there be nice weather for the wedding? That's a crucial question for them. Hello, Stav.
Hello there, Jane. It depends on what you like. A lot of cloud, mild weather, or sunny and cold. Yes, it's February, and I'm not going to be talking about the cold or the snow, but of how mild it's going to be. It's going to be mild for the next few days, potentially looking very mild into the start of next week. But it will come with a lot of cloud. That's certainly what we've got through this morning. You can see a lot of cloud across the country. Best of any sunshine across eastern fringes of the UK and across central southern parts too. But we've got a weak weather front as well across the country, which is producing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain. Most of that becoming confined towards western areas as the afternoon wears on, with central and eastern parts really turning dry. There will be a lot of mist and murk as well across western areas. There's those temperatures, 9 to maybe 13 degrees in the warmest spots across central southern England. And then this evening and overnight, it stays quite damp across western areas, some rain getting towards northwest England as well. And it stays quite damp for Northern Ireland, western Scotland. Maybe a little bit dry, though, for Wales, the southwest of England. Most places in the south will be dry. And again, towns and cities really will be mild with that blanket cover and some mist and murk as well. Quite breezy, though, across the north and the northwest corner of the UK into the start of the weekend. Here we'll have a weather front which will be slipping its way southward. So that weather getting in towards northwest England, parts of Wales into the afternoon. Blustery showers following on behind across Scotland, maybe with some sunshine. And it stays dry, bright across the southeast and very mild pretty much wherever you are. 10 to 13, maybe 14 Celsius. That weather front bringing the wet weather to northern England clears away during Saturday night. And then we're continuing with a run of west-south-westerly winds, and it's feeding in moist air which has been routed from the tropics. That's why it is so mild for the foreseeable future. Again, it comes with a lot of cloud through Sunday, the best of any brightness, the lee of any higher ground, so eastern Wales, central and eastern parts of England, and also eastern Scotland, with rain and more of a breeze across the northwest corner of Scotland. Double figure values once again. Now notice the orange colours, the deep orange colours pushing in off the Atlantic for Monday. It could potentially bring us some pretty balmy temperatures, although it's not expected to be wall-to-wall sunshine. There will be a lot of cloud around, still some rain and quite a breeze across the west, but given some sunshine, we could be seeing highs of 17 Celsius in one or two places. That's still way off the February record of 20 degrees. So a lot of cloud around for Monday, outbreaks of rain across the west, some of that rain quite heavy for northwest Scotland where it really will be quite breezy. And this is pretty much what the temperatures will be looking like on Monday, closer to the mid-teens, but to the lee of any high ground, given some brightness, and 16 or 17 Celsius. Don't forget you can keep abreast of all the weekend weather by heading online. Jay.
Super. Thanks very much, Steph. Thank you. And just a reminder of our main story here this lunchtime. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair has urged Britons to rise up against the decision to leave the EU. He said people voted without knowing the real terms. That is all from BBC News at 1 team, so it's goodbye from me. Enjoy your weekend on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams wherever you are. Bye-bye.